In the last 500 years, Filipinos have fought for freedom, unity, and equality. We have made our mark in many fields, from science and medicine to culture and the arts. We are beacons of creativity, resourcefulness, resiliency, and compassion. In 2021, the Filipino people will join the world in commemorating one of the greatest achievements of mankind, the first circumnavigation of the world. We celebrate this historic achievement by bannering an important message. Over adversity and struggles, we shall triumph, putting humanity first, always. In the
Alam na puso, sa dibdib ko'y buhay, hindi sumusuko, sa hirap matlumbay, sa mga manlulupi, hindi pasisi, duyan ang magigiti, hindi papi. Kabuti ay batid, limandan mang taon, ng daluyot yanig, tayo bumabangon. Isang puso pa rin, isang alak sa dilim, iba't iba man ang mga bituin, sa isang kalawakan magniningning, magkahawak kamay sa lilim ng bughaw na langit, umaawit. Mabaon man sa putik, matapos ang bagyo, lahat magkakapit-bisig, patuloy na sumusulong. Isang puso pa rin, isang alam sa dirigmang Pilipino, dakilang lahi ko, bayaning Pilipino, sa makabagong panahon.
Okay. Magandang hapon po. Good afternoon. Welcome to the 19th Countdown to 500 online lecture series. It is brought to you by the National Quincentennial Committee in collaboration with the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, the Presidential Communications Operations Office, Radio-Television Malacañang, Philippine Information Agency, the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, National Historical Commission of the Philippines, and the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Department of Education. So we are live across the Facebook pages of these government agencies, Facebook platform, and this is the 19th since pandemic. We launched this lecture since the pandemic, and we are heading to the last two lectures, I think. So the last two lectures will be held this March, and the final lecture will be delivered in Cebu on before the eve of the 500 years of the victory at Mactan. So with us now is Dr. Carlos Madrid, and let me read his bio note. Okay, so and before I read his bio note, I just want to contextualize the lecture for today. So we chose March 18 as the date of the lecture, of the 19th lecture, be, because mainly because this is the 500th anniversary of the Philippine-Spanish contact. So it happened in Humanhon, an island in Guiuan, Eastern Samar, on March 18, 1521. So I think 2 days, 2 days after the expedition arrived in the the Magellan Alcan expedition arrived in the Philippine waters, and and the rest of the details will be discussed with us by our guest lecturer from straight from Guam. So the expedition, before they arrive in the Philippines, they came from Guam. So it's just very providential that Carlos Madrid, our lecturer, is the one delivering the lecture for this afternoon. It's just to complete the cycle. We are retracing the history from 500 years ago. So let me read this bio note. Our guest lecturer, was born in Spain in 1976. He holds a PhD cum laude in contemporary history from the Universidad Complutense de Madrid, the same university, di ba, where Jose Rizal and several of our national heroes graduated in Madrid. He is an associate professor of the Micronesian Area Research Center of the University of Guam and has been its director of research since 2019. He has he has conducted research projects about Micronesia, Spain, and the Philippines since 1996 and has given lectures at the University of the Philippines, Keio University of Japan, University of Guam, and in Diplomatic School of Madrid. In 2005 and 2006, he was he was a co-founder and editor-in-chief of Filipiniana.net, a division of Vival Publishing House. From 2014 to 2018, he was the director of the Instituto Cervantes de Manila. Our lecturer specializes in documentary research and popularization of history. He curated the exhibits Serafico, the Franciscan missionaries in the Aurora region, on permanent display in Museo de Baler in Aurora Province, Philippines, and the exhibit Belao na isang Bangiol at the Belao National Museum in 2005. He is the editor of the fourth edition of the book Philippine Cartography by Carlos Quirino. He has authored numerous books, most recently, The World of the Manila Acapulco Galleons. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Carlos Madrid Alvarez Piñer. Good afternoon, Senor.
Good afternoon, magandang hapon, Senor Alfonso. Thank you. Maraming salamat po for this generous introduction, for your kind words, and for the invitation of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines to present you today on the connections and the relations between Guiuan in Samar and the place where I'm talking you this afternoon from Micronesia. I'm addressing you from the island of Guam, from the Micronesian Area Research Center, and we're going to be discussing some of the historical episodes that created a unique connection between the two territories. For that, I will be counting on the help of some images that will make it will help us visualize what we are going to be addressing in the talk. The whole idea of the talk is that to emphasize that Guiuan has been a reference point for centuries, a landmark for the people of Micronesia, with a long traditional seafaring that lasts for many centuries. In Guiuan, that as we all know, in the southernmost point of Samar, it had in the 1800s over 13,000 inhabitants. And it was a very fertile territory in which hunt and boars, the cattle, plantations of and crops of corn, rice were on demand. And at the same time, it was known for being a place for fishing, gathering of pearls, of trepang or balate, and of mother of pearl in general. With this background, it's not surprising that that it was an important and significant area of interest. But at the same time, we need to understand why, particularly for Micronesia. Guiuan and Micronesia share something in common, like all the eastern coast, like Baler, that Mr. Alfonso has mentioned a while ago. Baler, all the Pacific coast of the Philippines are prone to suffer bagios and natural disasters resulting from the exposed or the openness of the area to the Pacific. In particular, Guiuan has been in 1897, for example, affected by a very destructive bagyo that caused multiple damages, and in more recent times, and most tragically, in 2013 with Yolanda, that actually caused multiple damages of all sorts. Fortunately, I understand that the town of Guiuan, the city of Guiuan, is flourishing now. The church was rededicated on December 8, 2019, and there's a number of initiatives that have been taken by the local government to move forward from this disaster. However, as far as the content of our talk today is concerned, we go back to 1859 and the account of well-known German writer Theodor Jagor, who during his travels in the Philippines, he gave a detailed account, a relatively detailed account of a group of Micronesians that are in Guiuan, fishing for mother of pearl. One is he found them not particularly in Guiuan itself, but south of Guiuan in the island of Sulangan, part of Guiuan as a municipality, but a separate entity. And Woleai is actually very far from Guiuan. It's 1,100 miles east of Samar. One has to wonder why such a small atoll, like we see in the images, with about 1,000 inhabitants, or in the 1800s probably about 600. It's undetermined, but with a very limited population. How is that they made it all the way to Samar, to Guiuan for fishing? Woleai being 4.5 square kilometers in surface and with a limited amount of inhabitants, is also located not far from where I'm talking to you today, here in the middle of the archipelago, historically known as the Caroline Islands, but now part of the Federated States of Micronesia, a little bit east of the island of Yap. Micronesia, just for as a short introduction, is that area of east of the Philippines that includes the archipelagos of the Mariana Islands, including Guam, Palau, and the Caroline Islands that I mentioned that are now part of the Federated States of Micronesia, that include Kozhai, Pohnpei, Chuuk, and Yap. And Micronesia also includes the territories of Kiribati and Nauru. Well, this whole region, and Woleai in particular, is affected by the natural, by the environment, like everywhere else. But the connection with Guiuan is the result of actually the currents of the Pacific, that they naturally move westward in what is called the North Equatorial Current, and it makes it for an area known for seafaring traditions, in which the sea is the actual. It not only doesn't separate, but it actually connects all of these islands in challenging voyages, but at the same time, relatively regular voyages. This natural setting with the North Equatorial Current makes it inevitable that during the multiple hundreds of years that these islands have been inhabited, sooner or later, survivors of voyaging expeditions or intentional traders will end up in the eastern coast of Mindanao, Leyte, and Samar. This current also moves on the other way back to the west, back to the east, and the equatorial countercurrent that is found between the islands of Indonesia and the Philippines, all the way across the equatorial line. Mentioned this is a picture of Oleay with a canoe house in the main island where they have been, but we're as I mentioned, the culture of canoe making and traveling with canoes, it has a long-standing tradition, and it has made it was a form of settling, trading, war making or conflict resolution, a very complex process of knowledge on the stars, on the currents, and on different forms of getting from one place to the other across the Pacific Islands. It's in the notes of or in the book Travels in the Philippines by Jaguar that we find the specific details of this group of I would say navigators. I'm hesitant to use the word castaways because it's not their case. They went there intentionally for trading. 5 canoes that left Boleay looking for mother of pearl, for Madre Perla, specifically to Guiuan. 9 men as crew in each of the 5 canoes, and with gathering fresh water from the rain, fishing occasionally, and surviving on at least 1 coconut a day and 2 sweet potatoes a day that they were cooked with the ashes of the coconut husk. Out of the 5 canoes, 2 of them sank in view of one another, for what Jaguar tells us, and after 2 weeks, survivors they reach Mindanao. So this account is well known. It's nothing surprising, but it's the idea that, as I mentioned, no, is the natural destination of any canoe that it either intentionally or not navigate towards the west. In the case of the people from Woleay described by Jaguar, they reached Tandag near on the eastern coast of Surigao and stayed there about 2 weeks. It's very interesting to see, no, again, reinforcing the idea that their trip was intentional, how they found their way north, going from Tandag to Cantilan, from Cantilan to Bacuag, from Bacuag to Taganan, and there from Taganan to Surigao, and finally in 2 days, finding their way to Guiuan and to the island where they were seen by Jaguar, Sulangan. This is showing that with 1,100 nautical miles of difference, it shows that that initial concept of the islands of Micronesia that was, or the islands of the Pacific in general, has been completely isolated and ignoring the surrounding regions of the world. It was accurately revised by scholars that questioned that in reality what the ocean was doing was connecting and interconnecting these communities. Sure, we don't find, we also can have the risk of overemphasizing that connection. The idea that the traders from distant islands such as Woleay, Lamotrec, or Palau themselves could travel to the Philippines. It doesn't mean that the trade was frequent and regular. It must have taken place as needed, occasionally, or as a survival mode in case of a storm. But archaeological evidences in the islands do not find the richness or the variety of imported products like one can find in trade hubs, if I can use the word hub for this era, I'm thinking Butuan, for example. Moving forward is we find that, as I was mentioning before, the island of Sulangan, south of Guiuan, and Guiuan itself, was known for being, as we see in this map from the early 1830s, there's a fishery of balate, no? Trepang or beche de mer, the sea cucumber, concha, shells, that could be also mother of pearl, pearls, and sea guy, the little shells, etc. So this is the map is an evidence, this 1833 map of the one of the reasons that could have prompted the woolly Ions to trade in the 1850s. At least in the 1850s, we have to also keep in mind that what Jaguar gathered was he was passing by there and he took the time to interview the woolly Ions, but it must have happened multiple times over the decades, and we're going to elaborate that. I mean, if we find it as late as in the 1850s, we can certainly expect that kind of connections to have happened in other locations of the eastern coast of the Philippines and in other parts of, or in Guiuan in particular. In fact, is another example, well, the map of 1710 by one of the pilots of the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade, Acapulco, Manila, and then now the Acapulco, Joseph de Somera, who reflected, who visited the Palaos Island and at least in passing and could record the maneuvering of the canoes, the excellence of their navigators, and the tattoos, the pintados that they associated also with the culture of the Bisaya people. In these interactions, we find that a little bit earlier than 1710, in 1696, two of the Jesuits that they were working in the Reducción in the island of Samar, they were doing a regular visita, the Czech Father Klein and Father Tucho, found the survivors of a shipwreck expedition from the Palau Islands, 29 men and women and children that in December of 1696 had been already in Guiuan for a while, and where they had met survivors of a previous shipwreck, which is, it's already the third time that we find reference. Not only, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to convey is that we don't find that many references on other locations in Surigao, for example, or in Caraga, of visitors or traders from Micronesia. There must have been, and I don't have any doubt that is the survival of the records of Guiuan and the importance that Father Klein and Father Tucho gave it, Legobien and all of those who copied these maps, the importance that they gave to this connection. It allowed them to determine the existence of populated islands in between, at that time what they thought is in between the Mariana Islands and the Philippines. This Father Klein asked these survivors in this well-known map to put with pebbles or with garbanzos, depending on the country, the shape of their islands, and not only the shape and the names of their islands where they came from, but also, let me see if I can have a close-up. You see here the numbers are the ones that are inside the island. Is the number of days that takes to circumnavigate the island, el bojeo. And the number in between the islands is the number of days that it takes to go from one island to the other. Panloc, being the most important of the islands of Palaos, the Republic of Palaos nowadays, is the only one that has a connecting number in between the Micronesian Islands, the Caroline Islands, at the time just named Nuevas Filipinas, the new Philippines. It's in the whole map, we find the numbers in between the atolls and the islands to see how many days it will take to go from one to the other. But there's no number to go from the islands to the Philippines, even to Siao, where eventually a similar instance had happened a few years earlier. It's only in the case of Guiuan and Palaos that we find the number 3, as in it will take 3 days to go from Palaos to Guiuan. This is another evidence of the importance of not only I think the idea that the Philippine Islands existed and they were there. There's beyond doubt as far as the peoples of Micronesia is concerned. They must have known with the experience of not hundreds of years but thousands of years accumulated the knowledge that towards the west there are islands, and in fact not only that, there are specific names for those routes, and there is orally transmitted knowledge that the navigators could find land also going southwest, what is today Papua New Guinea, but that area was less safe, and it was preferable to travel to the west, to the islands of what is today the Philippines, as a place that is safer and that where they will find a more welcoming arrival. So these oral accounts among the Micronesian navigators are evidence of the knowledge of those lands. I think that's beyond doubt. It's more of this map. I'm using it in particular, the map of Father Klein, as an evidence of the relevance of Guiuan in particular, as a reference point, as a landmark, and probably due to the further research is needed on this, not but probably due to the abundance of products of interest for the people of Micronesia, and perhaps also to the easiness of traveling there, or the welcoming attitude that they may have found from the people of Samar in general and Guiuan in particular. This, by the way, this map in itself, and as Mr. Alfonso mentioned, I have a particular interest in cartography and map making. This is relevant because it's a Western map that is incorporating non-Western forms of a spatial representation. These are not spatial. How can I put it? Is the distribution of the islands are not reflecting of the actual distribution on a map. Is more of the result of a mnemotechnic, or the way the islands have been memorized, or the informant is retrieving the names and the locations out of memory, and is reflecting them in this particular shape and form that the Jesuits and the Spanish understood to mean a literal representation of the spatial distribution of the island. As you can see, I don't want to elaborate long on this. What we find is, I was mentioning how further research is needed on this. No, we have also to understand why would we understand that it will take 3 days to go from Palau to Guiuan. Is it literal, or there's some misunderstanding, or there is an exaggeration, or they're trying to emphasize the proximity of it? But as I mentioned, this is not the only instance. There's also in the island of Siao in the 1670s, where shipwrecks of another expedition were made by the Spanish priests in the Molucca Island. What I'm trying to convey is that this idea that is summarized in this slide, that we have, I wouldn't say numerous, but accounts enough, evidences enough to consider that some of these contacts between the indigenous peoples of Micronesia and the indigenous peoples of the Philippines in the eastern coast of the archipelago may have been due to accidental landings, or the result of storms, of shipwrecks, etc. It drifted, of course, but there are written accounts and also orally transmitted accounts that we can say that safely confirm that there was also an intentional trading routes between the islands of Micronesia and in the Philippines. I have mentioned already that given these difficulties in navigation, the challenging nature of these expeditions means that while we 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 cannot consider that the islands in Micronesia were completely isolated from Southeast Asia, at the same time we shouldn't overestimate the frequency of those contacts and the nature of them. There must have been um, occasional trips known to be possible if necessary or if desirable, but at the same time only taking place when needed, when necessary. The references to Guiuan as a landmark of such voyages is confirmed by the accounts of other claims, as I mentioned, and Jagor in 1859. With this, we were hoping to continue researching on these interesting connections, and I would like to make a call for our audience. If you know, I know that there's an ongoing exhibit, initiative of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines and the recently opened Museum of Guiuan. I haven't been in Guiuan in a long time, but I think it was with precisely with Jeremy Barnes, director of the National Museum, back in 2004 that we passed by Guiuan on our hopes to go to Homonhon, and we couldn't go. And knowing that there is this ongoing exhibit about Guiuan and the contact with the Palau Islands, I would like to make a call for anyone who may have. I know they're descendants of those settlers from Micronesia in the different communities in the vicinity of Guiuan and other islands. Please contact me if you see. I copied my email in the slide, and now I'm open to questions and to comments if anyone is interested. Again, thank you for your attention. As we say in Chamorro, Dan kulo si Diyos maase. Muchas gracias. Maraming salamat po. I don't know if Ian, Alfonso, are you gonna channel any possible questions from the audience? I understand that they will be reflected in comments on the Facebook pages that are being streamed. Otherwise, I can take any question coming from you guys.
Yes, senor. I apologize. I just answered a call. Yeah.
I know you guys are undergoing the main events of the commemorations of this quincentennial today, so I understand it's a pretty busy day.
Yes, actually, we're here in Guiuan. We just came from Suluan and Homonhon the past 2 days. So, and earlier we just unveiled the historical marker for Guiuan Church. So actually your lecture is very timely. The speech of Director General Jeremy Barnes, he was the one who unveiled the historical marker. His speech is related to your topic. He extolled the role of Guiuan not only on Magellan but its transcendental, its consistent history of being welcoming and, well, as your title says, the beacon of the Pacific. So yeah, so it's very timely, and we are having this lecture on the very same day that the people of Guiuan, particularly from Suluan Island, met Magellan for the first time, and it was a cordial meeting. So, and we are glad that you enrich the history of Guiuan's part in the Pacific by from the perspective of the people from Palau and other the Pacific islands. So thank you very
It's,
much for that.
I think it's the National Historical Commission to be congratulated for organizing these lectures and for making it coincidental my little contribution on this particular day. And I would like to think of this short presentation just as the beginning and establishing the call for help for the communities in Guiuan and in the vicinity of it. There must be families or barangays, individuals who may have pieces of oral history or they're known to be descendants of some of these survivors. And from the Micronesian Area Research Center, we're very much interested, and I'm sure from the National Historical Commission of the Philippines as well, on finding out more about it and trying to establish further relations between the two territories.
Yes, and it so happened that the municipal administrator of the Guiuan municipality is a historian, Miss Kina Kwan. I'm sure you know her, Kina Kwan. So
I know of her.
yeah,
Know.
and with her authority now in Guiuan, she can do the cultural mapping, the oral documentation,
Wow, it's
and
fantastic.
yeah, and actually she's leading the Quincentennial Committee here in Guiuan. So
Fantastic.
yeah,
The alignment of the stars, no, like the same stars that guided the Micronesian navigators in reaching different territories are the stars that are aligning to have a historian in charge of the municipality of Guiuan. How ideal.
yes, and of course, and tracing the route of Magellan in the Philippines in the past 2 days is quite surreal, you know. So we are just reading them on textbooks, of course, during elementary, that they arrive in the Philippines. And we have this famous song by Yoyoy Villame, if you know this novelty singer from Bohol, you know, on March 16, 1521, when the Philippines was discovered by Magellan. So it's a very familiar song. And although it's quite politically incorrect to call it the discovery of the Philippines, and this is commemoration, and this commemoration is rereading the role of the Philippines by invoking the part of our ancestors and of course the Philippine territory in the success of humanity in circumnavigating the planet for the first time. So instead of we are also acknowledging that this part of Philippine history um, led to the colonization eventually, but what we are celebrating or commemorating in this moment in 2021 is at least the values that we can draw from the what happened 500 years ago in of course in Guiuan, and of course later as the commemoration proceeds to different, because there are 34 quincentennials happening as we mark it. We will mark the events, the sites along the route of the Magellan Alcad expedition until we reach the exit point via Sarangani, and then they reach the Moluccas, their goal, their objective.
And there will be
So
the time for Indonesia, I presume.
let's see if our Indonesian counterparts if they have their own commemoration or projects in relation to the Quincentennial.
That would be ideal,
Yeah.
especially knowing that Enriquillo, the slave, and I think the
Yes.
other slave of Magellan,
He was from Sumatra, according to
Pablo,
Pigafetta. Yeah.
right? Like they were from, if I'm not mistaken, from Sumatra.
Yes,
Um,
according to Pigafetta. And then
yeah,
I think there's this chronicler, I mean, there's this survivor of the expedition who who mentioned that Enrique was from Moluccas, but we don't know, because these are two primary sources competing
yes,
with each other.
and one can wonder to what extent we're using the
Mm,
terminology with precision, right?
yeah.
But speaking of precision, I would like to
Mm,
finish without mentioning that
mm,
the maps and images that I have shown on the islands of Nuevas Filipinas and the one by the pilot Jose de Somera. All of this comes from the Archivo General de Indias in Seville, and as part of the effort of the Spanish administration on making accessible as a higher number of documents as possible. These are all available online in the website known as PARES, the Portal de Archivos Españoles en Red. I know we have been having other and more distinguished speakers from the Archivo de Indias, but this is an opportunity for me to mention what a great service it is for us researchers that are working from more distant part of the world, and we are hoping that there will be more and more materials coming up on digital.
Yes, and hopefully through with your familiarity in Philippine history, and of course now in your new terrain, the Micronesia area research, we can have this synergy and the well, basically this part that part of the world was previously part of the Greater Philippine area, so it's about time, no? I mean, actually, there are already pioneering researches about the Micronesian Philippine relation, but let's enrich it further with your intervention and your leadership.
Let's see if we can gather, as a result of presentations like this that the National Historical Commission of the Philippines is putting together, if we can gather contacts or oral testimonies. I'm looking forward to contact the mayor of Guiuan, and hopefully one day when the pandemic is over,
Yes.
go there and visit and do a little bit of field work in the
Yes.
search of these materials. I know of Dr. Borrinaga, well known also for the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, had a student, if I'm not mistaken, that was descendant or was known to be descendant of one of the Palawan settlers, Palawan
Yes.
or from the Caroline Islands, Palawan.
Yes, and we should also take into consideration that this part of the Pacific is well, well, a distant brethren, by blood, by the Filipinos as a Austronesian family, Yes, aside from that, yeah, and then of course our colonial experience, which you mentioned, the castaways. Well, you don't want to call them castaways, but still, the very theme of the very subject of your topic is this, the being Guam as a consistent, hospitable place in the the Pacific part of the Philippines.
You're right
So,
in that, in the sense that those connections are really of multiple nature. There's of more not only the colonial experience and even in contemporary times with migrants and cultural and economic exchange, but at the same time, even before the colonial times, considering that the islands may have been settled originally from either from the area of Sulawesi and parts of the Philippines, depending on the archipelago. No,
yes,
uh,
and
it goes way back, and as you were saying, it's part of the same Austronesian family. So the connections are multiple and very strong.
yes, and before we wrap up, we can entertain some comments and questions from
Yes, please.
our live audience. So we have here a good friend, David Garcia, one of our young geographers, who's now in New Zealand, and he says, because both Filipinos and Micronesians are great navigators due to our common Austronesian wayfinding heritage. So, and just to highlight, the Quincentennial Commemorations in the Philippines, it's more of a celebration of the world of our ancestors. I mean, how were our ancestors during the time of the contact? I mean, during the time of the arrival of the Magellan expedition, because uh, a lot of Filipinos were educated that the Philippine history begins when Magellan arrived. So we are now, there are already efforts of debunking that misconceptions that Philippine history should always begin on March 16, 1521. So we are now in the time when our concept of Philippine history goes beyond 1521. And that is that is the exciting thing about learning Philippine history, to dig more what was the world of our ancestors before the coming of the Spaniards. And there and then there you can establish that, and then there you can establish some parallelisms, and then the vestiges of our ancestors before the Spaniards, um, married with the Hispanic culture, Hispanic legacy, the architecture of the churches, the textile from tattooing of the Visayans transferred to from the patterns, textile patterns of across the country. So this is more on propelling the interest of our countrymen about our ancestors before the coming of the Spaniards. So this is the one of the platforms the government is using to dispel misconceptions that our ancestors were savages, barbarians, and come to think of it, the very the very first day our ancestors made contact with with Magellan, we showed our ancestors showed humanity and compassion. I mean, they were 4 months traversing the Pacific without food. They were, if you kindly correct me, Senor Carlos, they were already eating leather. They were already
Yeah,
consuming rats.
rats, yeah. Even when they passed by here, by Guam, which is probably the island where they landed,
Mm,
there was a similar instance of that. Like they were. In fact, if it was not because of the stopover in these islands that they
mm,
initially called the Las Velas Latinas, precisely because of that, the shape of the Latin sail, that is the last, the sail closer to the poop of the ship, that is called the
mm,
Latin sail. So the impact, the visual impact that it caused among the expeditioners, the explorers, was such that the initial name was Islas de las Velas Latinas. There was some kind of misunderstanding and on the practices upon arrival, and it triggered a conflict in which the 7 islanders were killed by orders of Magellan, and one of the villages was burned. So the first contact in these islands were, it was somehow similar in the sense that there was initial support and exchanges, and but as soon as there was a misunderstanding, conflict was about to happen. And but if it was not because of the hospitality and the support or given by the islanders in these islands as well, the expedition would probably have not make it to the Philippines.
yes, yes,
Significant.
precisely. And I think there are no questions so far. So on the comment section, so let me browse it. There's this question. I don't know if what layer of history or what time frame is he referring, ano, from Bartolomeo Simpson. Is it possible that some of the Spanish soldiers left in Cebu survived and held captive as slaves? Maybe he is referring to those who were involved in the Cebu massacre of May 1, 1521.
Yeah, I let
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I leave that to be answered by more informed scholars.
Yes. Yes. Maybe we can only entertain questions related to the topic. You know, it's more on about celebrating the part of Guiuan in this world history. So with that, Senor, thank you very much, and we hope to see you soon here in the Philippines. So, and take care. And any parting words before we end?
Thank you, Mr. Alfonso. It's a pleasure, and I would like to insist that anyone to feel free
Mm,
to contact the NHCP or the email that I placed on screen.
mm,
If from Guiuan or from any neighboring communities, there's somebody knows of someone. Oh, by the way, before I close, for example, in the University of Santo Tomas Museum, and I owe this information to my colleague, Dr. Rubinstein, here at Mark. There is a machi, a woven mat that is credited as being from Samar, and it's actually, it has the design and the shape of a Micronesian mat.
mm.
of the outer islands of Yap. So yes, my call for anyone knowing or having information about this to feel free to contact us. And again, to the NHCP, to the National Historical Commission of the Philippines in general, and to you, Mr. Alfonso, in particular, my thanks for this invitation, and looking forward to visit Guiuan.
Thank you very much, Senor Carlos. And this has been your host, Ian Christopher Alfonso of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines and the National Quincentennial Committee Secretariat. Wishing you a good afternoon and ingat po tayong lahat. Maraming salamat po.
Mandirigmang